Daily Solutions Podcast. Daily Solutions Podcast. Daily Solutions Podcast. Podcast about float tanks, floating power.
All right, welcome.
Hey, everybody.
That's Ashkahn over there.
That's right.
And I'm Graham.
Yep.
And do we have a question. And that question is, how is the float biz different than opening in any other business?
Yeah.
So first of all, biz is actually just an abbreviation for business.
Yeah, that's the first thing you should know.
Which, so, if you didn't understand that, then the question could be kind of confusing.
I feel like everything we say all the time is kind of the long form answer to that question. So maybe you're looking for a more abbreviated version of...
I almost feel like it would be easier to say what's the same. Like it might be a shorter list,
So what's different about float tanks?
Your construction cost per square foot is like way higher than a lot of other businesses.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of construction stuff. I mean, there's a lot of specifics of construction, which we don't need to get into. But I think the general thing that's interesting about construction is the lack of external expertise. Like you can't, if you were to be building one of so many other things in the world, you could find someone who's a construction expert, a company that you could just hire to do your construction.
If you're doing swimming pools or if you're,
movie theaters or whatever it is, right? Like or a manufacturing plant. There's all sorts of expertise out there, companies that do that. It's not really like a float construction company you can hire. Like you kind of have to like hire someone and then train that person on how float tank construction works, which is not always the most enjoyable thing in the world. Like a lot of times contractors and stuff are very resistant to you telling them things that are specific about float tanks that they need to be careful of.
And it's going to be the story in a lot of different areas, too. It's kind of the same for talking to your health department, like needing to explain what the heck you're doing at every step of the way, going through the planning department. It's just, you'll get really used to it.
Yeah.
And having to convince people that float tanks are totally reasonable and not scary at all. And yeah, that's different than if you're opening a restaurant, which people, like, when you say you're opening a restaurant, they understand what you mean and kind of what's going into that and what's required.
And
yeah, and what? What's I
had a really good one, it was going to be a really good point, but
okay, I have something on the positive side for what's different. So, and I think almost as a result of it being such a weird process in a lot of other ways and having a harder time than some businesses that are going to open, there's a lot of camaraderie within the float industry.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And we hear this all the time from people who, are entering this even sometimes later in life and have been through 2 or sometimes 3 other industries with full-on careers in them. And almost everyone just says there's something kind of magical and special about the float industry. Like people are nice to each other and they help each other out. And
well, people are doing it because they want people to float.
Yeah.
Like that's people's main motivation for opening a float center. They love floating. They want to share floating with other people.
Yeah, and the just the sense of community, and again, almost going above and beyond to help your quote unquote competitors is not really seen in a lot of other areas. And in fact, you see the exact opposite. Things that are fraught with disagreements and like small attempts at sabotage and trying to undercut prices, and the fact that you don't have to put up with a lot of that, just bullshit from the float industry is really nice.
Yeah, so that's definitely super cool. And I remember what I was going to say now, which is back towards the negative side. No, I mean, it can be exciting too. Like I think one thing that's unique about the float industry is there's just a lot of questions out there that we don't have the answers to yet. Mm-hmm. There's knowledge that hasn't been figured out. Like we're a new industry. We're figuring things out. Like we're continuously like on the edge of human knowledge. Like there's certain questions that like no one has done the research to figure out the answer to quite yet. Which sometimes can be frustrating when you're trying to figure something out. And, oftentimes it's really exciting too. Like you get to be like, cool, like you watch it develop over the years. Over the years, like we've had some questions that didn't have answers before that got answered.
Yeah.
We're kind of like explorers, like out there, pushing something further than anyone has gone before. So that's part of being in a new industry. And when you get into the float tank world, it's something that, whether you like it or not, you're gonna have to accept as part of being in this world.
Yep. Whereas in a lot of businesses, where there's the saying, "This job would be great if it weren't for the customers," and in the float world, it seems to be the exact opposite. Almost everyone that we talk to, their favorite part of the job is the customers and getting to hang out with them and getting to impact people's lives. So the fact that the people you're serving are not only benefiting from what you do, but often you just get to see them at their best. They're coming in here and they're either really excited to try out something new or excited to go float, or they've just floated and they're super relaxed and really mellow and kind of blissed out. And it's a great section of humanity and a great slice of people's own lives that you get to witness. So, yeah, the fact that interacting with your customers is like a great joy rather than a burden, I think, is different than a lot of other industries.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's cool about the float industry, and
you got a positive thing to say over there?
I got a positive thing to say over here. And this is not only true of the float industry, but we sell something really interesting. Like, we're not selling pants, we're not selling like nuts and bolts. We're not selling. There's so many like things in the world that I think people are a lot less excited about in general than float tanks. Like, there's very few people who, when someone asks you, like, what do you do for a living? Are like, you're just like in your head, like, boy, are you about to be in for a ride? Like it's awesome. Like, it's really cool to be doing something that's so exciting and that people are really excited about, and that, upon people hearing about it immediately is something that's of interest and often something that people want to experience. Yeah,
for sure. And back on the negative side too. Like there are very few other jobs or careers that I think you absolutely just kind of need to have someone holding your hand through starting up. And like we do consulting obviously through Float Tank Solutions, but there's other people, there's other centers out there that do consulting, and like working with someone who has been through the process before is almost mandatory. Like, there's so many little details. This is not an industry where you can get started by yourself and kind of just make do with what you've read online and piecemeal together and assume that things are going to go well. Like, there's just too much that you personally are going to learn over those first 3 years that you need someone who's been through that, who's guiding you and making sure you don't mess things up early on. So, that's true of things like being in the medical profession and different things where you're required to have certifications to get started. But because you're not required to, it's a shock, I think, for some people entering the industry, just how much domain-specific knowledge is necessary going into water sanitation and construction especially, and just all of these different aspects where you kind of need to be like expert level and obviously aren't when you're just getting started. So, as far as things that surprise people for differences between this and even something like opening a restaurant or something like that, I think that's a big one.
Another one, I mean, it's going to sound obvious for a second, but another one that I think is very unique to the float industry is the amount of Epsom salt we put into water, which obviously...
Wait, get out of here.
But here, hold on, like, hear me out here. So at some point I was like, okay, I wonder if there's any other industry that uses this like saturated Epsom salt solution, because if they do, maybe they have like tools, maybe they're used to dealing with it, maybe they have different like devices that work correctly with it. And I tried to find something and I really couldn't. Like, it doesn't seem, as far as I was able to find, I couldn't find any other industry out there that is mixing this much Epsom salt into water for any purpose. Actually, just yesterday, I was looking up, I was trying to look up like a graph of Epsom salt saturation points. And I was like, let me just do a quick internet search. And I like searched on the internet, and like the first 30 results were all just float tank stuff. Like, everything was just like some sort of float tank website, like trying to answer that question in some way. So really, as far as I can tell, this really seems to be like the solution we're using in our float tanks seems to be pretty specific and pretty unique to the float industry.
Yeah, certainly. And again, almost goes without saying, but worth noting. And there's another aspect too, which comes with, protecting against that salt and a lot of the construction requirements going into building your center, which is it's a lot of money you're sinking into something you can't take with you. Even for something that's also in the health industry, that's similar with a lot of equipment you need to get, like take a gym or something that you're starting up. If your gym's not doing well and you're liquidating, you get to sell off all of your big fancy gym equipment, and that's a big part of what you're doing. And with float tanks, I mean, you get to sell your float tanks, but almost as much money and oftentimes more is going into your walls and floors, which, unless you're selling your center as a whole shebang, you don't get to liquidate and get rid of, which also makes moving really hard. So yeah, that's just kind of a limit, like the sheer amount of money going into your walls and floors and other parts of construction means that changing location is really hard. So you really need to nail location from the very beginning. And it means that kind of being successful and actually being able to turn a profit with your business and stay open has more serious implications because you can't get all of your money back out of trying to sell it piece by piece again. And there's not, like, especially things like talking to massage studios. Like, I remember one of our massage friends, we were sitting down for lunch one day and she's like, yeah, I had to move my my massage practice this last week. And we're like, oh, that sounds crazy. What'd you have to do, And she's like, I took down this tapestry.
Yeah.
And I put it up in this other place. I'm like, you suck. Like, if we wanted to move our float center, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars we're essentially throwing down the drain. So other industries do not have that same problem.
Yeah. Another tricky one is float tank maintenance. Like that's a tough spot that people get into with their float centers, where if they're trying to get their shops to be a little bit more kind of staff run, it's really hard to transfer the amount of knowledge that goes into like maintaining the float tanks or fixing something that goes wrong with the float tanks, because they're really specific. And there's just there's no like float tank repair company you can call to come in and fix something like you could with like almost everything else that's in your shop or in like any normal person's business. There's services and people with expertise that you can call to fix things, but it's even pool and spa knowledge and stuff like that usually falls short of what you need to kind of properly fix, maintain, properly take care of a float tank. So that's kind of a tricky one, and it's a good one to keep in mind as you're going into opening. Like if you are trying to get on a path towards being, out of the shop and not kind of getting those 2 a.m. calls when something's going wrong, like that's something you're going to have to get somebody else on your staff trained up with. And it's going to take time, and you're going to be really reliant on that person because if they leave, they're taking a body of knowledge with them that's hard to like replace, or it's a tough problem to just like throw money at like you can with other things in business.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, God, like I feel like we could just keep going almost forever. I mean, it's gonna be like several hours long.
Those are all the differences, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's totally it. But that's at least a lot of the ones that come to mind, and I think that are some of the most salient out there for just very noticeable things if you are in the float industry versus running kind of any other shop.
Yeah. So if you guys have other questions out there that you want us to answer, you can go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
Yep. Any questions? Short, long.
About float tanks, not
vague.
about float tanks.
Yeah.
Whatever you want.
Yep. And, one other difference in the float tank industry is you have a couple of people around who will answer them. So, we're out here and listening. All right. Talk to you guys tomorrow.
Right.